Hello and welcome to the Gifted Ed podcast. I am your host, Megan McCarthy. We're grateful for the opportunity to share this space with you today as we talk about the complexities of giftedness. Today we welcome Erin Vanek to the Gifted Ed podcast. Erin Vanek is the founder of The Gifted Perspective, a platform that raises awareness about giftedness as a form of neurodivergence. With over 12 years of experience in education, a master's degree, and credentials as a licensed gifted intervention specialist, Erin brings both professional and deeply personal insight to this work.
The one thing with gifted brains is they're usually really good at masking and they're really good at getting by until they can't. You never know when that's going to happen. Maybe it's going to happen in third grade, maybe it's going to happen in college, but when they hit that wall, it can be identity crushing.
As a twice exceptional or 2E individual, gifted and living with ADHD, and a parent of 2E children, Erin understands firsthand the unique challenges and strengths that come with neurodivergence. Through the Gifted Perspective, they offer resources, support, and education for both parents and educators, while also cultivating a thriving online community where people can find connection, validation, and a sense of belonging. Welcome to the Gifted Ed podcast, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
I am too. I'm trying to remember how I came across your page on Instagram, but I immediately personally followed it personally and have gathered so much knowledge and resources from it. So I'm excited to kind of dive deeper in it today. I'd love to start talking just by learning more about your career as an educator and how it led you to starting the Gifted Perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a teacher for, all kind of blurs together. I think this is year 14. And for 13 of those 14 years, it's been in the field of gifted education. I went through gifted education, gifted services growing up, and I felt like it was my happy place in school. And it kind of was just an elementary school, but I remember just loving it. And so when I went into education, I was like, I want to do that for somebody.
Yeah.
So while I was kind of a teacher, I would create a lot of things. And that's just something I love to do, like my outlet. So like projects, all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with just posting really like resources for teachers, the products and that sort of thing. And so my friend actually was like, oh, you have to go on Instagram. It's this new thing. And that's how you'll show your product. So I tried it out. And it was, again, just a very like teacher focused on like classroom ideas. And then there was a trend going, and it was like showing different sides of something. And I was like, I wonder if I could do this with a gifted student. So I made a reel about like kind of what you expect a gifted student to look like.
Okay.
And then I went through like what the gifted student actually could look like in all the different forms, like a gifted student who blurts out and who's inattentive and who's kind of a selective consumer and anxious, perfectionist, all of that. And that reel got so much feedback. And I guess what stood out to me wasn't even like likes or comments or anything like that, but a lot of private messages that I got from people that were like, oh my gosh, that is me. Like, I see me in your reel. And I kind of realized that this was an audience that had never really been spoken to. Like directly like this. So I really pivoted everything and was like, I want to start really focusing on this whole gifted thing. And so it's really been a learning process, and I've just been diving deeper and deeper and learning more. And I feel like even learning more about my own background, like as I look through experiences I went through, I'm like, oh my gosh, it all makes sense now. So it's kind of the journey that took me here.
Well, and even just the research, the awareness, all of that how it's expanded over the years is really tremendous. So I'm sure I can imagine some of your audience being parents now or adults now navigating workplace and finding a lot of themselves in some of those posts of things they've never put language to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it was so different. I know like when I was in gifted services in like the 90s, it was just thought of as such like a separate thing and such like you're gifted when you're in school and then you leave school and that's it. Like I never really thought of myself as a gifted adult. I didn't even think that could exist. And I remember when I was first teaching and my students would say like, oh, did you used to be gifted? Because again, the assumption was just like something you are when you're little, and then it's done.
The track stops.
Yeah. And like now that I've been like researching, I'm like, oh, it's how my brain is. Like my brain didn't suddenly switch when I graduate, and I still have that same brain. And so it's been really interesting looking at, like you said, the impacts in adulthood.
Yeah.
And that's where,
So you referenced the website that provides educators and families. Just it seems like a wealth of resources from when I've been on it and kind of clicking through. What are some of your most accessed resources or the ones that you feel like empower, want to highlight the most?
yeah. So the resources I put together after, again, getting so many, I get a lot of DMs or like direct messages from parents asking about specific questions, situations that their gifted child was in, or from teachers. And when I started getting like the same one, I'm like, we need like a resource that addresses
Mhm.
it. Not just one person. There's hundreds of people who keep asking me this. So I put together like workshops. They're essentially like at minimum of 60-minute videos so that you can, again, I'm 2E with ADHD, so I can't work through a whole thing. So I'm like, I need something that I could pause and come back to. So you have the power to kind of watch it in chunks if you want. That really dives deep into the nitty-gritty of some of these common topics like executive functioning, underachievement,
Mhm.
perfectionism, and just what is giftedness. And then I also like to include just like printable resources to kind of help you along with that. And then you'll also find on the website, like I have resources, like activities that you can do with gifted learners, and then also just like printable handouts. I would say my top 3 is my workshop on executive functioning
Yeah, I can see that.
gifted learners, because it also talks about how executive dysfunction can happen in gifted brains and the actionable strategies. My side quest adventures is number 2,
Ooh.
which is a product I created. I'm a parent of 3, 2 of whom are identified as 2E, gifted and ADHD. So over the summers, we're all home. And so I knew like I need something. I need something.
Yes.
I kind of created just a full vision of like it's a journey and you're kind of traveling through this island, solving different side quests along the way. And they're all like independent, logic and creative based little quests for the kids to complete. So I think that's number 2. And then number 3 is my gifted advocacy bundle, which has just a bunch of resources to help guide parents on how to advocate for their gifted child. Because I think it's
Yeah.
hard to even know where to start. And it's overwhelming when you're facing opposition from a district or an administration.
Mhm.
You can feel kind of lost.
Mhm.
Definitely the top 3.
And kinda taking a step back, which you said in the beginning, obviously, giftedness presents itself so differently with every student, every individual, every adult. Can you kinda walk us through how you define or describe giftedness as obviously that impacts then how all the resources and how they're accessed?
Yeah, absolutely. How I define giftedness is cognitive efficiency. And so the idea that a gifted brain is able to be really efficient in gathering information, in understanding that information, and then in making connections. So, yeah, it can come across with like your intellectual overexcitability, like having a lot of knowledge, but I really hate calling it smart
Mm.
because I feel like that is just too much of a blanket label. And a lot of times, I think in our society, smart equates to like getting all the answers right. And I think like that's one huge goal of just my like the gifted perspective in general is kind of breaking that giftedness is not about like the outcome in the product or the grade. It's about the processes
Mhm.
happening in the brain. So that cognitive efficiency, being able to make connections really quickly, that also kind of stems off into divergent
Mhm.
thinking. So your gifted learners, gifted individuals are going to be the ones that challenge you, that ask questions, that are curious, that are offering ideas that maybe aren't listed in your
Yeah.
lesson plans. But if you actually think about them, you're like, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. There's also this intensity that comes
Mm.
with gifted. And if we go into like the whole neuroscience of it, gifted brains with those connections, they're also really connected to the limbic system, which is what controls emotions.
Mhm.
And so again, you have this really intense connections in your brain connected to the area of the brain that is in charge of emotions, it can make these really strong, intense emotions, which can come across as these huge feelings like intense frustration, a really strong sense of justice. Like when they believe there has been a
Yeah.
wrong, they will voice it and they will feel it deeply and they will fight for it. And kind of going along with that is the asynchronous development. I think that's a huge part of giftedness. So the idea that when you have a gifted brain, it's not just all going to develop
Even,
evenly.
yep, the same
You
pace.
know, there's going to be some parts that are going to be developed really quickly and some parts that might even be behind their chronological peers, but recognizing that there's going to be those different levels. So for me, giftedness is really about the brain and how it
Yeah.
works. And I think that misconception, like what you were saying, is that giftedness is tied to achievement, tied to success, it's tied to grades. I mean, you see parents who will fight to get the gifted label for their child because they believe giftedness equals success.
Mhm.
And I keep trying, like, that's my one thing I try to get across. Giftedness is not a guarantee. Like, just because you have a gifted brain does not guarantee anything. Like, it's still all about your brain and how you think and what you put in and all of that. So I think the big misconception is that is solely based on academics achievement, kind of the
Yeah.
product.
And I'm sure one of the top resources that you access or you talked about earlier that's accessed heavily, the advocacy part for parents, which is so important. And obviously it depends what sort of schools that your child's in, but understanding all of these nuances that it's not a grade. It's not obviously tied to a grade. It's not obviously tied to a certain curriculum. It's the approach that the brain is taking for all different assignments throughout the day, even socially too, how they are approaching problem solving with peers. I mean, everything is impacted.
Yeah, absolutely.
But going along with that, so in previous episodes, we've talked about accelerated learners and passionate learners. And I'm a social worker, right? So I have such an interest in kind of the first thing I was drawn to on your page was another common profile being a gifted learner who underachieves. And can you share experiences with students who've presented this way, or maybe some of your findings or descriptor of that profile?
Yeah, absolutely. This is also kind of one of my favorite populations of gifted students to work with
Okay.
because I think they're really misunderstood.
Yeah.
I will take it and if we step back, the idea of we have this misconception, right, that ties giftedness to achievement.
Right.
And usually that level of achievement, who's it directed by? It's directed by the parent or the teachers. Like they decide, okay, achieving is going to be getting an A. And so it's very like taken out of the control of the students. And so when the student doesn't hit this mark, when the parent, the adult in their life, you are underachieving. And it kind of like can even translate to parents or teachers saying, well, I don't even think they're gifted because they're not hitting this mark. So I get lots of parents or teachers that might say, is my child actually gifted
Mm.
or says they're gifted, but they're not, they're not getting straight A's. They're not doing this. So one thing that makes me cringe
Mm.
is when people say live up to your potential.
Yeah.
I think that's just a lot of weight to put on a student, to put on anybody.
Pressure. Yeah.
A lot of these gifted, who we would call these gifted underachievers, it's not that they're not living up to their potential. It's that they're being maybe selective in what they are achieving in.
Mm.
I know myself, when I was in school, I hated science class. Absolutely was bored in it, didn't find any interest. And so I would probably be what you would call an underachiever. I would do some of the assignments if I wanted to. I did enough to get by so I didn't fail. Um, However, if you would step back and look at me, you would also notice that I was at the same time killing it in language arts. Like I was doing amazing and I was in all these extracurricular clubs. And so it wasn't that I was an underachiever, is that I was selecting what I wanted to achieve in. And I think sometimes we kind of put that label on students, oh, they're an underachiever, and it makes us discount all of the areas that they are actually putting their effort into.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes unfair to think that a student's going to put 100% into everything because nobody does and no one loves everything. And so kind of being able to, as adults, to step back and say, okay, is this like underachievement, or is this just an area where they're not putting 110% into? And that is okay at some point. So I think understanding that instead of saying somebody is an underachieving student, being more specific. So, oh, they're underachieving in science. They're underachieving in language arts. Again, it kind of takes some of that label off. Jim Delisle does like a really awesome talk of this in one of his books where he kind of compares underachieving to being a selective consumer.
Yep. Okay.
I love that. Like
Yeah.
that chapter is one that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Because the idea is that if you are an underachiever, so kind of it's going to be something that's across the board. So in multiple different subjects and for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, this one project you didn't do well on, therefore you are an underachiever. Well, maybe they just really weren't into that project. Maybe something else happened. I remember when I was in high school, this will date me a little bit, like one of the Harry Potter books had come out. And so instead of doing my homework, I just sat and read the entire novel. Yeah, and was I an underachiever? I didn't do the assignment I was supposed to do for the week, but in the meantime, I was reading cover to cover this other book. I had a different goal in mind that didn't happen to align with the adults in my life. But again, so the underachiever, you're going to see it across the board, and it's going to be prolonged. So kind of this continuous difference between capability and what is produced.
Okay.
And so usually when you have somebody who is truly underachieving, where it is, again, prolonged, you see it across multiple disciplines, it comes from a place of low self-esteem, low worth, that perfectionism. And it's somebody who really believes like they can't.
Yeah.
There's a big fear that if they do it, they're going to let somebody down. And so like it's easier just not to do it. And so I think when you see someone who, again, is like across the board underachieving, you really want to take a step back and think about that why. I know I have a workshop on underachievement, and I kind of dive into this idea of the self-determination theory of motivation.
Oh.
And it's the idea that there's like three main things that motivate all humans. They have to feel relatedness. So they have to feel like they are connected to a community, a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
I think some of our gifted students definitely don't feel like that. They feel alienated. They feel like nobody gets them and no one's trying to get them. Then the second part in that theory is competence. In order to be motivated, they want to feel like they will have some success and that they'll be effective. So this doesn't mean that you want to give all gifted students something easy so that they can like never be challenged, but it means you have to build in challenge with like intentionality.
Yeah.
And if you notice someone who is an underachiever, what might help, instead of saying, hey, I know I expect more from you, you're scoring up here, but you're producing down here, there should be like, you need to live up to that. Point out their successes. Because if they're not feeling that competence, they don't have any of that motivation to try. They're just too afraid. So point out that they are competence. And that third piece is the autonomy. So humans are going to be motivated if they don't have some choice in the matter. And I think that's the other big thing for our gifted students who just feel like everything is, again, delegated to them. So if you have somebody who is kind of across the board underachieving, like find options for them to have a choice. Even if it's like an essay, can there be 2 prompts that they can choose between? Different project choices, novels to choose from, math, maybe instead of saying, hey, you have to do all 10 problems, choose 5. Things that to us might seem like, oh, well, that's like a really little thing.
Insignificant, yeah.
Absolutely, because it gives, again, them choice, kind of helps them be an owner in their own learning. Yeah, I feel like I just went all over.
No, I'm going back to kind of when we first started talking about this, and I really appreciated the differentiating between selective consumers and students who present more underachieving. If I heard that right, it almost seems like with selective consumer, if there's one, maybe 2 areas that are if you want to say lower than the other, I think it's also super important for us to realize the depth that the gifted brain will go is like far more intensive than a neurotypical brain. So just the effort and the time that it takes to do, like I think you said, like one assignment 110% is so much more time consuming than it is for a neurotypical. So then in comparison, right? Like if we just do something average, it might look less than, but it's really maybe just typical. But in comparison to all the other areas, I think it's always, like you said, important to take a step back and just look at the whole as well. And if one area kind of is less than the others for a short amount of time or giving context of other things, that's okay. And just that I think the need to normalize that too, because of what are we doing to kind of perpetuate perfectionism then in a way, if that's kind of what we're expecting all the time. Where then if it's more in the underachieving realm, that hit on self-esteem really seems to be, which I think probably is why I'm so drawn to this being a social worker, is really seem to be hit on because I really struggle when I hear someone described as unmotivated as a stop period. That's who the child is versus, like you said, the why. And I think that's such a big piece. And I always try and figure out ways to increase, as do our teachers that I work with, as they're amazing, but trying to figure out that autonomy element within the practical, realistic realm of the assignment. And sometimes too, like I think gave an example of like 2 prompts, and the student could create a third. Like, could there be an open-ended third prompt that's within reason? I feel like that's always a powerful tool. I think that sometimes is overlooked, like you said. Like it seems insignificant to others, but huge for that student.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of students who are kind of these underachievers, they might, even when they're hit with success, so let's say they have, they do really good on a test, what kind of stands out with these, again, versus like the selective consumer, the underachiever will usually write it off. So, oh, I did good because it was lucky, or the test was
Mm,
easy. They don't even own their success.
interesting.
And so they really, where a selective consumer, again, is selective. So they know, okay, I'm going to select to put my effort into this because of either A, I enjoy the topic, or B, the teacher formed a relationship with me, and so there's a mutual respect, or C, I'm interested in the project or whatever. And so they do feel more like they earned that, where a true underachiever usually never feels that. So even their failures, they will own, and they'll be like, well, yeah, of course I didn't get it. Like, I'm not good in math, versus their successes, they will just write off.
And I can absolutely see the frustration levels with teachers and parents working with the students so closely when they want to celebrate that positive, whether that's a test, a project, or whatever, that the kid did well. And the kid is not rejecting it, but shying away from or minimizing it maybe when the educators or the parents are probably trying to like highlight it even more. Like, look how amazing you did.
Yeah. I think one thing you could do then as a parent or teacher, and again, I'm a teacher myself, so like I have to be very like, this is something that doesn't come as naturally to me. I want to do what you just said and celebrate my student. They accomplished something, they finished
Mhm.
the project, they wrote the essay, whatever. Like, oh my gosh, look at you. But taking a step back and doing more celebration along the way,
Yeah.
or less at that final product, but more, because again, those underachievers will get built up with that constant verbal praise, but don't just save it for the finished
Right.
product. So get kind of along the way and celebrate all the little steps that they do. Because again, to us might say, well, yeah, they wrote a sentence. That sentence could be a really big deal for them. So
Right.
celebrate that.
And then two, kind of what we talked about in the beginning, which is how often do we praise the outcome
Mhm.
and not
Yep.
the road to get there? Because the road to get there sometimes is really ugly or just not attractive, should I say?
Yeah.
When the grade at the end or the shining report at the end or whatever the outcome is tends to be what's shown, and if that's what gets the attention, and not right or wrong. I mean, it makes sense for people wanting to praise products that our kids created. That, of course, makes sense. And that's what we put on our the hallways of schools and look how great, but it's hard to put on display and give attention to the road it took to get there. But that probably goes with what was the first relatedness, like to really be in
Yes.
with your kid, with your student in the ugly times when there's tears, when the papers are being crumpled up, to still be like, I'm with you in this. I'm
Yes.
hoping is a resource or is a strategy maybe that can help.
Yeah. I know when I'll sit with some of my students and this kind of going more in that perfectionism, like they'll go down these paths of catastrophic thinking,
Yeah,
where it just snowballs and snowballs into, they missed a question and all of a sudden by the end they're the worst student ever and they don't deserve to be in this class.
right.
And I'll take the crumpled up paper and I'll lay it in front of them and I'll have them kind of follow through that catastrophic thinking. Okay, so let's say you are the worst, like then what?
Mhm.
And that we usually like when it's challenged and they have to actually verbalize it, they'll realize that they don't really know. And I think as humans, like we're afraid of the unknown.
Right.
And so that stays really scary until you kind of face it and realize, oh, I guess that would be the end.
Yeah.
Then I would be the worst. And then we kind of take it back and say, okay, so if that's the worst, like that's it, what makes you the worst student? And then we kind of unpack all of that. But again, to do any of that, it comes from that
The
relationship.
relationship, yeah.
I think when you're working with gifted students, that relationship is 100% the most important thing.
Paramount, yeah. And then I think too, I never wanna overlook, I think there could be students who present as underachievers who need really a lot of attention to the self-esteem, and I could also imagine there being students who need attention to a mental health concern that's going on as well, and how to differentiate those 2 might be duration, might be intensity, might be the educators and the parents probably really knowing their kid and what's going on, but I think that's another element to kinda keep in mind maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing with gifted brains is they're usually really good at masking and they're really good at getting by
Yeah,
until it can't.
yeah,
You never know when that's going to happen. Maybe it's going to happen in third grade. Maybe it's going to happen in college. But when they hit that wall, it can be identity crushing.
yeah,
And so, yeah, kind of looking and seeing, like, is there anything underlying that's being
yeah.
masked? I think you're right. That's really important.
So I guess too, just if I was having initial questions about whether it's my own kid or a kid I'm working with in giftedness, are there any certain resources or places on your website that you think would be like a good place to start? Or, if any of this conversation is kind of resonating to anyone listening, where would be kind of a good place to start?
So I do have a workshop, giftedness and underachievement,
Okay.
where I do tackle this and I kind of go into those 3 areas of that self-determination theory and just some more strategies related to those 3 areas. And then also just what does it mean to be gifted? So if you're listening to this and maybe y'all have to talk about brain and science and you're like, wait a second,
Mhm.
what does it mean? And the emotional side and the sensory side and the intellectual side, because that's definitely there. But those are 2 workshops that might help dive a little bit deeper.
Okay. Thank you, Erin, so much for your time and expertise. I was so excited for this conversation, and I'm even more excited to go back to your website to check out some of those workshops alongside some of, I know, the teachers I work with. So I'm excited for that. We're so grateful for your expertise, and I encourage our listeners to visit The Gifted Perspective to explore more of these resources. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a great conversation.
So before we end, I just wanted to share a reflection question and then a call to action, something to try. So first is thinking of the students in your classroom. Are there any students whose profiles look similar to the gifted underachiever profile? And then our call to action is we just talked through strategies to support students with this learning style. Can you select one tool that we discussed today and implement it with one of your students this week? We want to thank you for joining us in this space today. Please subscribe to the Gifted Ed podcast to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Stay tuned for our next episode that continues to unpack the complexities of giftedness.